I'm going to spend some time talking about a story that I think is around the time of David. And the story of David's pretty interesting because it has the beginning story is of him being a young boy and having a slingshot and taking down Goliath. So it's almost like a way of explaining how there could be a force in the world that is very immense, kind of like the Pharaoh and Moses, and it can be tyrannical, which means it's got this kind of rule that's very oppressive, and it may not see that in itself, and so it just rules, and it assumes that because it's so big, it won't be taken down. And it's a way for it's kind of like a hopeful story because it helps us see that sometimes with time, as we progress with technology and how we evolve, we can assume that we don't need God. And if God doesn't allow us to have those moments of pause where we look around the universe and remember that there is something bigger than what I've built, for example, then they can almost lose that remembrance that is supposed to soften the heart, and their heart becomes hard, and they just assume everybody should listen to them. And that's basically how the Pharaoh became the Pharaoh, was that he just thought, because I have all this power, I must be the biggest thing that there is, that's God. Not knowing that God actually tells us, maybe that back then there wasn't scripture or anything, but what God tells us of himself is that he's the most gentle, he's the most compassionate. So if you ever have any of these people who are so harsh and they're trying to tell you that we're God and we know what it is, automatically that's a red flag. It's like, nope. God talks about himself as the most compassionate, the most merciful, the most loving. So if that's not in you, then you have nothing to do with God. God has nothing to do with you until you pause and try to evaluate again why your heart is that tough. So the story of Talut and Jalut is a story of, I think it's similar to that of Goliath and David. And it's maybe later on there's this narration where there's it's almost like a war that's, I don't think it wants to become a war. It's just basically people who are traveling and they're trying to move to a new area. And as they're traveling, so if you think of an army, right? So these people who are assuming we want to leave, and we already know that we're strong enough so that if we actually meet somebody who's an enemy, we can defend ourselves. So because God knows that these people are already strong and they already have a leader, Talut, who's very, God has given him already like a body that's very strong, a mind that can think and discern really well. And he is, because if you know that from the reference of he's inspired, it means, okay, well, God talks about himself as the omnipotent, which is in Arabic, it's called the most power, and he has continuous power over and above what anything exists can have. And he calls himself the omniscient, which means I have all the knowledge. So I know what I can see because he calls himself the seeing, but he also knows what's inside your heart that you don't even know. So if you understand that God is everywhere, then you almost want to find out what God is, what God loves, how to be with God, because then you have nothing to worry about. All you have to do is just pray to God and to be inspired. And if you have to wait a little bit, you know that, oh, it's because God says, you know, if something has to wait in the universe to align in a certain way, then I'm just going to make sure that it aligns at the best time for you. Maybe now is not the best time, so you just have to wait. And then you can worry about other things and being inspired to do other hobbies and work towards other goals. So it's almost like the story of Solomon, where people pray, like Solomon, he used to pray. He's like, God, give me something, like gift me with a kingdom, meaning an understanding of the world that's never going to be available for anyone ever after me. Right? So this is what I mean when you ask God for something, ask for the biggest things and God will give it to you because he already knows that you have faith in him. So he's like, okay, all I have to make sure now is that you're going to use it ethically and you're not going to become a dangerous person in the world. So this is basically what, and then sometimes God just gifts people because they're already very ethical. So then God's like, well, I'm going to just gift you something. So this is why we should always have the understanding that everybody in the world has faith. And sometimes they just need to be reminded that they have faith. Because in the past, people used to think that to have religion is the only way to have faith, which means if you practice things in a certain way every single day, that's the only thing that can make you have faith. But if you take religion away, for example, and you say to somebody, just anybody, when you wake up in the morning, can you give me a call? They're going to be, okay. So they already have faith that you're going to exist in the morning. They already have faith that their phone is going to work. They already have faith that they are going to wake up. They already have faith that you're going to wake up. So you see how people, we all have faith. And what we do is we want something in the world to confirm for us that it's stronger than us and that it helps us sustain ourselves and stay strong and keep this consistency in the world existing so that we rely on it and we don't feel like, wait, we just woke up and the sky was purple. Like, that's not normal unless there's a storm, in which case it's like a dark gray almost. And that's something we come to expect. Or when the sun is setting, and sometimes the lights will make kind of this like reddish, pinkish, purplish color, right? That's normal. We come to expect that. So anything out of the ordinary that we kind of have no warning about, that can scare us because we're just like, well, why is this happening? And then we get scared. So God wanted to show that having that knowledge, that inner knowledge, doesn't have anything to do with what you're able to do in the world. So some people will say it should only be for people from a certain family. Some people will say it should be only people who have a lot of money. Some will say it should be only people who work in politics, right? They'll give all these excuses, but then God almost always reminds us, he says, no, the prophet, like Jesus wasn't like that. Muhammad wasn't like that. They were actually just simple people. And actually, Muhammad was an orphan, so he didn't even have parents. But God, look what God gave him. And so it's just to say, and David, the same thing. He was a little boy when he took down Goliath. So he can think like, you wouldn't expect that. And Ali, he was 10 when he thought, I'm going to think about the world in a way that helps me think like an adult, but I'm only 10. So this is a way of God showing that he can give his gifts and his not from his knowledge to whoever he wants. And who's going to say you're not allowed? Like, you're not going to be able to challenge God. That's not a good idea, right? Because God can say, okay, I'm going to let you think that you have power, and then you're going to just keep climbing. Imagine you're at the top of a mountain and you think, I'm the best, and then God throws a storm at you and then you die. Or you fall and you break your leg. So this is the way why we shouldn't feel that arrogance. Arrogance is a feeling of, I am so good, I'm doing this all by myself, I don't even need God. Because then you're like, are you really thinking you should think like that? You should try to start like a new way of thinking so that you don't assume that God can't take that away from you, that kind of healthy, strong body. So this is typically what usually happens when prophets come up against people, is that these people, they forget that God gave them a lot of money, for example, or that they're liked by a lot of people in the world. So then when prophets come and they say, we want to think in a little bit of a different way, they almost get offended. They're like, no, you should think like us. And that's almost already God saying, no, I gave everybody a brain and they're allowed to think whichever way they want. And if you're going to stand in their way, I'm going to stand with them because you're the one that's being a bully right now. And so now you understand why God's always with the loving. Like, he's always with the people who are trying their best to do something kind with themselves and be charitable with themselves. So now think of the candle that I showed you. If you think of that other wick, if I put a stick or like a flint and try to light the other candle, is it going to turn off this one? I'd actually do that, but I don't have a flint and I don't want to use plastic or something. It'll make it very, very hard to breathe. But it won't. Like, if you take the candle and try to light it, and then it's almost like a match, right? If you strike a match and then you light a candle wick and then you light another candle wick, it doesn't take from that original match, right? It just lights. And that's the way faith is. So actually sharing your faith or sharing these ideas actually reinforces your own faith, and it makes it grow, and it helps other people grow. So think of the ocean. God actually gives this really cool example. He says, if I was to help you imagine like the biggest ocean, and then you were to stand in front of the ocean and think of a needle. So it's like, you think of a needle, it's really, really thin, and you just dip it in the ocean. Okay. How much water is on that? Hardly anything. Now, did that water take anything from the ocean that's actually in the water? Nothing, right? So now God says, if I was to hear every single person in the universe ask me for something, and I was to give them everything they wanted at the exact same time, it wouldn't take away from God's power. like not even close to that little bit of water that's on the needle. So then you're like, oh, yeah, I see how this is very easy for God. Like, God doesn't have to think that he needs to be worried about us as humans overcoming him. But what he wants us to see is that his creative power is that great, that he built us in a way that makes us so beautiful to work with and to see, right? Like human beings are so beautiful. Like he made us beautiful. He made us think of beautiful things because look at the creation around us. He makes us talking with the way we talk and converse and build diversity around each other is a really beautiful thing. And this God loves this because he's like, look what I can create in the world, and I'm creating love in the world. So I want you to think of that when you think about you sharing any healthy ideas. Just think of that needle and think of yourself as, I know I'm not God, but if I give of myself, it's not going to decrease from me. It's actually going to help other people because that's what God wants. He wants us to spread kindness and excellence in the world and to do things in a beautiful way. So sometimes we'll find that we have these moments where we feel a little bit sad or we feel like kind of like this low mood, and we're not sure if like, are we supposed to have this high faith all the time? And the answer is no, because the companions of Muhammad, sometimes they'd come to him and they'd say, when we're sitting with you we feel like this huge burst of faith and we feel so good, but then when we have to go back home, or we go to work, we we find that our faith kind of like decreases, like on that graph a little bit. And he said that's normal. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Like you can't spend your entire day just thinking about all the healthy things that are almost attached to faith, because you're problem solving and you're trying to figure out things that are a struggle or a challenge for you. So you have faith that you can do that because you're using your brain and you're allowing your emotions to change. And it's almost to say that part of what a believer in life is that he has all these emotions and he has all these struggles. If you're the same all the time, he says you're actually a hypocrite because you're lying to yourself, right? If you graph, like just that little graph of just going to work, look at all that change that already happened. And it almost replicates what our heart is. If you actually graph your heartbeat, your heart, it's always doing that. When it flatlines like that, that means you're dead. So you can imagine. And so God actually says people who are dead means that they have no faith. It means they just want to stay the same all the time. So they're dead. Like, don't even bother being their friend or trying to help them in any way. Just leave them until they kind of wake up to an idea of, I have to observe what's going on around me because I can't seem to be making any friends. So then they'll start to think that way, and then God will send them an angel to inspire them, and then he'll help them. So it's part of the reason why it's almost not a waste of time, but sometimes if you're just worrying about yourself and you have a group of friends who want to work with you and think as you are with how to continually grow and challenge yourself, you don't have to worry about forcing other people to think like you or to be like you. Some people used to think like that a long time ago when I was a kid, but we don't really think like that anymore. So knowing now that, okay, so the signs of a hypocrite is somebody who lies, somebody who doesn't follow a trust and who doesn't keep a promise, then you understand, okay, am I a hypocrite with myself? Like sometimes I make a promise for myself and then I'm not able to keep it. That's not the same thing, because when you're growing, you're almost making sure that you know what kind of promise to set with yourself, right? So if I say, I'm going to promise that every day I spend some time remembering to read something that helps me remember that feeling of awe, of reverence. So then you can say, I'm going to wake up every morning and I'm going to do that before I do anything, before I get out of bed, right? Sometimes you forget, and sometimes you go to the washroom and then you want to get something to eat, and then you're like, oh, I have to go brush my teeth and I have to go shower and then halfway through the day you're like, oops, I didn't do that. And then you can think, oh, I'll just do it now, right? So you kept your promise, maybe just not at that time. And then over time you can think, what is the best time for me to do that? Maybe it's before I go to sleep because I'm kind of winding down and I'm getting tired, and there's a book right here. I can just, before I go to sleep, I'll think about it and then I'll go to sleep, and maybe my mind will think about it with me while I'm sleeping. Because I love the feeling that I get after I exercise. It helps my mood. I made a promise to myself that one day I'll take a break from my body to rest. One day I'll go exercise. And then I need to take that extra day also because it helps my body and muscles repair. If you exercise every single day, it's actually not healthy because your muscles actually become more weak because they're not given time to become strong again after they kind of had that rest. So to explain that is actually a good parallel with faith, because for our muscles to get stronger, they actually have to tear a little bit. And when they tear, they get they need that rest so that they can build each other up again, and that's what makes them strong. So each time they tear, then they rest, then they build up again, and then they tear and they build up again, and that's what makes them get in the habit of, oh, I'm going to be using this muscle a lot, so I have to get really strong. So then your body becomes, oh, I can move really fast, I can stay in one spot but move really quickly without my muscle like falling apart because it's not used to moving at all. So uh, knowing that is almost like faith. If your mind and your heart are used to understanding that if I think about the universe and being kind and compassionate and how good karma is a good thing because it just builds itself all the time, then my mind and my heart are used to it and they're growing stronger, kind of like that muscle. And I'm allowed to have rest. So I'm allowed to have those moments where I need a break and I just maybe want to be sad, or I'm frustrated with something and I just need that time to be. And then maybe I'll find a hobby that helps calm me down. And then maybe I'll decide that I just want to chat with a friend, or I want to watch like a TV show and I don't want to think about anything at all, so that my mind and heart can actually rest. So all these things, knowing this and knowing that it's normal and it's healthy, helps us not feel bad about it. I remember when I was in, I think when I was in first year university, and I was having a hard time understanding like the best way to read so that you can learn. Part of me used to be afraid to ask, like, what's a normal way to learn? Because I'd be like, am I stupid? Like, is something wrong with my brain? Like, and if I ask, are people going to think I'm stupid? So knowing that people aren't like that and that people want to help each other and that we're learning about new learning styles all the time helps us not feel like that. Like the world is a very safe place because people have changed a lot about the way they think about the world and themselves and each other. So when you have these questions, if you haven't thought to ask it, then don't wait for somebody else to ask, because I'm sure everybody's thinking about the same idea. They're just probably wondering the same thing, like, is somebody going to laugh at me? And if somebody does, just say, hey, this is a really good question, right? And if you laugh like that, they're going to relax too, because sometimes people don't really know how to almost act or behave around new questions or new ideas, and they're almost like nervous, like, is this going to be okay? So if you feel embarrassed, just laugh it off. I used to have a lot of friends, like throughout all my classes, who used to enjoy having ways of making jokes around something that could be serious. Because sometimes if you're serious about something, it becomes awkward, and then people don't know how to make you feel better. And then they think that they always have to make you feel better. But if you take yourself kind of lightly and just say, oh, I didn't know, and you're silly. And teachers do this all the time. Sometimes if they make a mistake while they're writing on the board, they'll make a funny joke about it. They say, I was just making sure everybody was paying attention. And then, so having that kind of gentle and fun and light attitude helps everybody relax. And it's the way God and the prophet were. Like if you think of the prophet, he used to have a friend who always used to prank the prophet, like all the time. And when you think of somebody who is very dear to your heart and that you always want to be like on your best behavior around. Okay, this is the way all the prophet's friends were. Like Muhammad, they were always like very respectful, and they'd treat him with like a certain kind of like reverence, almost like being very quiet. And God says it's important to do that with him, because it's almost a way to show that with his wives, for example, we should actually treat women that way, because at that time maybe women weren't treated very well. So it was almost like he's getting them all used to, and because they're Bedouin too, like they're all Arabs, and it's almost to help them get used to there's a way to treat people, and women should be treated in a kinder way than maybe you're treating each other, right? So just getting them in the habit of changing their behavior. Now things are a little bit different because we're all used to, like, we all get along, we're all civilized, and we all know about common decency or just common courtesy. So anyway, all the prophets would treat the prophet like really kindly, except for this one. His name was Naaman. And even though his friends, Muhammad's friends, would always like, they almost want to like chastise him, be like, or scold him and be like, you shouldn't do that to him. Like, but the prophet would always say, leave him alone. It's fine. That's just his character. That's just his personality. He likes to joke and he likes to have kind of like a lighthearted sense of humor. So it's fine. So there's even one story where sometimes, because to show that sometimes people don't know about certain behaviors, the prophet always made sure that he didn't make people feel embarrassed if they did something by accident. So there was one case, or because sometimes if you teach somebody something and you kind of scare them, then they almost feel bad about themselves and they're not able to come out of that bad feeling. So anytime they come to Muhammad, then they'd just be like, I don't want to. And they almost shrink away, which is sad because now you're taking away your opportunity to learn. So one person, he didn't know. He was, maybe back then, like they didn't have a certain spot for people to go to the washroom. It's just like there was an open desert and then they start to put up palm leaves and trunks to kind of just create a shelter. It's actually pretty cool if you look on YouTube for the prophet, like just write Medina, like that, which means the city, and then masjid, which means mosque, and then prophet's time, and you'll see what it was like. It was just these little huts, and they just had these little, it was like a little village because it's just desert and it's a brand new place for them to learn, to live. So if you think and you imagine that in your mind now, and then you think of somebody who wants to go to the washroom, he might think, well, this is a good spot. So he just he just decided to pee in the middle of the room where they used to pray. So then the friends of the prophet were like, they wanted to go jump on him, be like, what are you doing? We pray here. But he didn't know. So Muhammad just said, leave him alone, let him finish. And then we can explain to him after that, because we're praying here, this is a safe space that we want to make sure that when we're remembering God, we're not disturbed or interrupted by anything that might make us feel like we're uncomfortable. So maybe we'll find another place to do that. And that's it. It's such a gentle and beautiful way of interacting with people who are learning still. And so to remind them to be gentle. So one of the things to remember, like for these ups and downs when we have faith, is when we are having these moments of joy, to remember that. So I remember whenever I used to go to the attraction park, those are usually the moments that I have when I'm usually laughing so hard because I love the feeling of just screaming on the rides and just like enjoying, I guess, the adrenaline that courses through your body. So in those moments, I always am grateful that God reminds me to be grateful that I have a strong body to enjoy that ride. So imagine that. It's almost like you're grateful that God's reminding you to be inspired, to remember Him. And then you're grateful that you're remembering to be grateful. And then you're remembering by being someone who's laughing and enjoying life to remember the prophet, which taught you that all this was okay. So imagine just those little moments. It doesn't take long. It's like 3 seconds, right? Just to remember that. And that's what keeps that faith growing. So no matter what, anytime you're feeling sad, you'll remember those moments and you'll be like, oh yeah, yeah. And then maybe you'll build a goal to remind yourself to do something that's a hobby that reminds you of that good feeling. And that's all you need. It's going to always be like that candle. Your glow will never go out.